Deep in the remote Bavarian countryside, there stood a lonely farmstead the locals whispered about Hinterkaifeck. The farm sat isolated between forests and frozen fields, so far from the village that at night, it felt like the world simply ended at its gate. The Gruber family had lived there for years, but the quiet wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating. Neighbors said the wind around Hinterkaifeck never sounded normal. It groaned, dragged, and sometimes whispered like someone speaking through their teeth. Even before the murders, villagers avoided the path leading to the farm after sunset. They claimed the shadows around Hinterkaifeck moved too slowly, almost deliberately. The Grubers, Andreas, his wife Cecilia, their adult daughter Victoria, her 2 children, and a maid worked the land every day. But by 1922, even the family admitted something was wrong. They told friends they felt watched, like footsteps were always pacing behind them when no one was there. It wasn't paranoia, things inside the house would go missing, reappear, or shift slightly, as if moved by unseen hands. Little Fersh Asilia, only 7 years old, told her teacher she couldn't sleep because someone kept walking outside her window at night. Nobody believed her. In late March 1922, winter had not yet loosened its grip. One morning, Andreas discovered something chilling. Footprints in the fresh snow leading toward the house, but none leading away. The tracks came straight out of the dense woods, as if someone had walked directly to the farm and then vanished. Andreas searched the property, but found nothing and no one. That night, the family heard footsteps in the attic. The Grubers avoided the attic whenever they could, but the sounds coming from it became impossible to ignore. Soft pacing, quiet breathing, sometimes even the scrape of something heavy being dragged. When Andreas investigated, he found hay disturbed, tools moved, and faint impressions like someone had been lying down there. But whoever it was always disappeared before he arrived. The attic felt warm, as though someone had just been in it moments before. One of the Gruber family's house keys went missing. It wasn't misplaced. Andreas was certain someone had taken it. Soon after, the front door began opening on its own, as if someone was testing entrances throughout the night. Victoria begged her father to contact the police, but he refused. He claimed reporting it would only draw attention. But attention from what? One morning, Andreas found a strange muted newspaper on the kitchen table. No one in the family had bought it, and no one from the village had been to the farm recently. The family stared at it in silence, all of them realizing the same thing. Someone had been inside the house while they slept. Someone comfortable enough to sit at their table. The newspaper smelled faintly of smoke and forest. The family's longtime maid, Crescens, had quit months earlier. She insisted the house was haunted, that something watched her from dark corners and followed her footsteps. At night, she felt breathing behind her. Something would tug at her blankets as she slept. She told her sister she would rather starve in the streets than stay in that house another night. The Grubers never replaced her, until 1 week before the murders. Maria Baumgartner arrived on March 31st, 1922. It was her first day on the farm and her last day alive. According to her sister, Maria was nervous but hopeful. But the moment she stepped inside Hinterkaifeck, she told Victoria the house felt wrong, like something was lurking behind the walls. That night, she heard footsteps in the attic too. March 31st was unusually quiet. The farm animals were restless. Even the dog growled at empty corners of the barn. Victoria played piano that evening, but each time she paused, the house seemed to breathe behind her. Andreas walked the perimeter repeatedly, unsure what he expected to find. But deep down, he sensed something was coming, something terrible. As night fell, the footsteps came back, slow, heavy, almost dragging across the attic floor. Maria hid under her blankets, trembling. Little Cecilia cried in her bed, saying the man in the attic was angry tonight. Andreas grabbed his lantern and stared up at the attic door, but he didn't go up this time. He felt watched. Sometime after midnight, neighbors later reported hearing something, a sharp, distant scream carried by the wind. No one could say who screamed or what caused it, but villagers remembered the unsettling silence afterward, like the world was holding its breath. And on that night, no one slept well. Something felt wrong in the valley. Investigators later believed the killer used a lure, something to draw one family member out to the barn first. Maybe a noise, maybe the animals reacting violently, maybe footsteps. Whatever it was, the first victim walked out into the dark, completely unaware the killer was waiting in the shadows with a mattock. The first blow was silent. What happened next remains one of the most horrific mysteries in German history. After the first victim fell, another family member likely came searching. Then another. Each time, the killer waited patiently, striking with brutal precision. This wasn't rushed, it was methodical, almost ritualistic. By the time it was over, 4 bodies lay in the barn, and the killer still wasn't finished. The killer walked calmly from the barn to the house. He moved room by room, hunting each remaining family member. Maria was killed in her bed instantly. 2-year-old Joseph was struck in his cradle. The killer showed no hesitation, no mercy, only cold, mechanical violence. And then, he didn't leave. Instead of fleeing, the killer stayed on the farm for days, maybe 4, maybe more. He fed the animals, ate the family's food, slept in their beds. Smoke rose from the chimney throughout the weekend. Neighbors saw it, but assumed the family was simply busy. In reality, a murderer was living among the bodies. Days passed with no sign of the Grubers. Their absence was strange. Andreas never missed deliveries or church services. Finally, neighbors visited the farm. They knocked. No answer. They entered the barn and stopped cold. What they saw would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Under a pile of hay, the 4 bodies lay stacked like discarded dolls. Some showed signs of attempted escape. Weddell Cecilia's fingers were torn. She had been alive long enough to pull her own hair out in terror. Even hardened investigators turned pale when they saw what had been done. This wasn't just murder, it was domination. Inside the house, nothing was stolen. Money lay untouched. Jewelry still sat in drawers. Expensive tools remained where they were. This wasn't a robbery. Whoever did this wanted the family, not their belongings. And the killer had stayed long enough to care for the animals, almost as if he felt at home. Investigators found a strange bed of hay in the attic, freshly used. Someone had been living there. They also discovered missing items: the key, the newspaper, pieces of food, all exactly matching the family's earlier sightings. The killer may have lived in the attic for days or weeks before striking, watching, waiting, listening. Outside, investigators found only one set of footprints leading into the farm just like before, but again, none leaving. As if the killer came from the forest, murdered the entire family, lived in their home for days, and then vanished into thin air. No witness, no suspect, no trail. Only the silent farm remained and the echo of footsteps that were never identified. Lead investigator Georg Reingruber later admitted something he rarely told anyone: he couldn't sleep for days after seeing the crime scene. He said the farm felt wrong, like someone was still inside watching them. His men searched every room, every floorboard, every inch of the barn, but the air felt thick, heavy, almost aware. Reingruber kept glancing over his shoulder as though someone was pacing behind him, just out of sight. He would never forget the silence in that house, too quiet, too deliberate. Inside the barn, investigators found tiny droplets of blood leading toward the house, but they faded abruptly halfway across the yard, as if the killer simply vanished. There were no footprints in the mud, no drag marks from the weapon. It was as if the killer walked on air. The blood stopping so suddenly convinced some officers the killer knew the property intimately, moving through hidden terrain. Others believed something darker. The killer left no trail because he had planned every step perfectly. For months, the murder weapon was missing until a strange discovery. During a later renovation, workers found a homemade mattock hidden in a false ceiling panel. The tool matched the skull wounds precisely. The chilling part? The killer had hidden it with deliberate care, as if he knew no one would look there for years. It made investigators wonder, did the killer return to the farm after the investigation, or had he never truly left? Villagers eventually confessed that, in the months before the murders, they saw strange lantern lights flickering deep in the woods behind Hinterkaifeck. At first, they thought it was hunters, but the movements were too slow, too deliberate, like someone was carefully watching the farm from between the trees. The lights appeared at midnight, sometimes closer, sometimes further away. After the murders, the lights disappeared completely, as if their purpose had been fulfilled. Weeks after the funeral, a farmer from a nearby village reported something disturbing. A stranger standing at the Gruber's grave long after midnight. He wasn't praying, he wasn't mourning. He stood perfectly still for nearly an hour, just staring at the freshly turned soil. When the witness approached, the man walked away silently, disappearing down an unlit road. Some believe the killer returned to admire his work. A postman later claimed he delivered mail to the farm the day after the murders. He said he saw smoke rising from the chimney and heard the dog barking. He even thought he glimpsed someone moving behind a curtain, though when no one answered his knock, he assumed the family was busy. What he didn't know was that the bodies already lay in the barn, and the person inside was not a Gruber. One unnerving detail often overlooked: a letter addressed to Victoria arrived days after the murders. It was postmarked before the family died, but the contents were unsettling. They spoke of fear, of secrets, and of someone watching her. Investigators wondered if Victoria knew she was in danger, if she sensed something closing in. That letter was never fully published. Perhaps the most haunting witness was the family dog. When investigators entered the property, they found the animal tied up, exhausted, and bleeding, its chain worn from days of frenetic pulling. Neighbors said the dog barked non-stop the night of the murders and then fell silent. Some thought he was trying to warn them. Others believed he saw everything. One of the most disturbing mysteries was the missing time. The murders likely happened on March 31st, but the animals were fed for days afterward. The fireplace was warm, bread was sliced fresh. Someone lived there from April 1st to April 4th. Whoever killed the Grubers didn't flee into the night. He stayed in the home of his victims, surrounded by their corpses, as if he belonged there. Many investigators now believe the killer had lived in the attic long before the murders, maybe weeks, maybe months. The sounds the family heard weren't imagination. They were the footsteps of a man moving carefully above them, waiting for the perfect time. The missing keys, the strange newspaper, the shifting objects, they were signs of an intruder living secretly in the home. Watching the family, learning their patterns, waiting for the night he would strike. The family had complained for months about footsteps in the attic, sometimes soft, sometimes pacing. But on March 31st, the day of the murders, the footsteps stopped entirely. Andreas thought the silence meant the intruder had left. But investigators later believed the killer had simply changed his position, moving from the attic into the shadows of the barn, preparing for the night he would strike. The quiet was not relief, it was the beginning. Inside the kitchen, investigators found something unsettling, an unfinished meal on the table. Plates half filled, a cup of milk still warm, bread torn in uneven pieces. It looked like the family had been interrupted mid-dinner, but the strangest part? One chair was pulled slightly away from the table, as if someone else had been sitting with them, someone they didn't expect. A harsh snowstorm had just passed when the murders occurred. Fresh snow should have recorded every footprint around the farm. But strong winds erased nearly all signs, leaving investigators blind to any escape route. The killer had chosen the perfect moment. Nature itself covered his tracks. It made officers wonder if he had been waiting specifically for that night, the night when the storm would hide his movements. What haunted investigators most wasn't the brutality, it was the tragedy inside Cecilia's final minutes. She survived the initial attack, lying wounded among the bodies. Evidence showed she had torn out patches of her own hair in shock or terror. For hours, maybe longer, she remained alive beside her murdered family. In the freezing barn, unable to call for help, her struggle left marks on the hay. Shortly after the murders, a railway worker reported something chilling. A man boarded a late-night train with bloodstains on his clothes and a dirt-covered matted candle protruding from his bag. When asked where he was coming from, the man simply said, "A farm outside Kaifeck." Before the worker could alert anyone, the man vanished into a crowd at the next station. His identity was never confirmed. During deeper investigation, officers discovered a small storage room built into the farmhouse wall. It wasn't on any blueprint. It contained a small bed of hay, a half-burned candle, and the remains of food. Someone had been living there, someone who knew how to hide between the bones of the house itself. The family may have never known that just a thin wall separated them from their stalker. Decades later, paranormal investigators visited the abandoned farm. One claims to hear a faint whisper in the barn as he set up his equipment, a child's voice saying, "He's still here." The recording was never proven authentic, but it shook listeners to the core. Whether hoax or real, it matched the eerie stories villagers told, that the farm held echoes of that terrible night, trapped in the wood and soil. One detail disturbed the police more than any other. The animals were cared for after the murders. The cows were milked, the chickens fed, even the dog was given water. Whoever killed the family didn't fear being caught. He moved around the farm like a resident. Some believe the killer felt comfortable, too comfortable, as though the farm belonged to him long before the family died. Robbery made no sense. Money and valuables were left untouched. Revenge seemed possible, but no enemy was ever identified. Some investigators believed the killer hated the family personally. Others thought he was obsessed with Victoria. And a growing number believed the motive wasn't rational at all. Something twisted and dark had been festering inside the killer long before he struck. The last known sighting of the Grubers alive came from two townsfolk who saw Andreas working outside late on March 31st. They remember he kept glancing toward the woods, distracted, uneasy. Something or someone was watching him. The witnesses said they felt a strange tension in the air, like the farm itself was holding its breath. Hours later, the entire family would be dead. When the investigators climbed the wooden ladder into the attic that morning, they expected dust, hay, and maybe a few stray tools, nothing more. Instead, they found a flattened nest of straw, as though someone had been sleeping there for days, maybe weeks, quietly listening to the family below. The indentation was unmistakable, a human shape, pressed deeply into the straw, still warm to the touch. Nearby, they found crumbled bread, a half-eaten slice of ham, and a rusty tin cup. Someone had been living up there. One officer whispered that he suddenly understood why the family kept hearing footsteps. The killer had been up here the whole time. The attic felt heavy, as if the air itself remembered every breath the intruder had taken. Outside, the officers traced the single trail of footprints that had led toward the farm the morning of the murders. But something about them didn't make sense. There were no footprints leading away. Even more chilling was the spacing far too steady, far too deliberate, almost as if the walker knew they would never leave. A few meters from the barn, the prints simply stopped, as if the person had been swallowed by the earth. The officers wondered whether the killer had walked into the farm and never needed to walk out. It felt like a signature mocking, deliberate taunting anyone brave enough to investigate. The Gruber family had multiple doors inside the farmhouse, but on the night of the murders, several were found locked from the inside. This suggested that the killer knew the layout, knew the locks, and knew exactly how to confine his victims. The family had told neighbors they could never find their keys anymore, keys that had been mysteriously disappearing. Police now suspected the intruder had been stealing the keys over time, memorizing which ones led to which doors. It wasn't a break-in, it was a slow invasion, carefully planned and executed. Someone had been studying the family for months. Investigators proposed a terrifying possibility. The killer didn't attack the family all at once. He lured them into the barn, one by one. Perhaps he imitated the sound of distressed livestock, knowing the family would rush to check on their animals. Once inside, he struck each victim from behind with the same pickaxe, dragging their bodies into a pile of hay. The killer's precision suggested experience. This was someone who understood human behavior deeply. Each victim was killed quietly, with terrifying efficiency, leaving no chance for escape. It felt less like a spontaneous attack and more like a ritualized execution. After killing the adults and older children in the barn, the murderer walked calmly into the house. Inside, Johanna, the maid of only one day, was asleep in her new room, a room she hoped would bring peace after a troubled past. She never heard the door open, never saw the shadow that crossed her floor. Her death was swift, but not merciful. The final victim was baby Joseph, lying in his cradle only 2 years old, unaware of the nightmare unfolding around him. The brutality of his death haunts investigators to this day. Perhaps the most disturbing part of the entire case was what happened after the murders. The killer didn't flee, he made himself at home. Neighbors reported seeing smoke rising from the chimney in the days following the murders. Food was taken from the pantry, beds were slept in, and the animals were fed every morning. Someone lived comfortably among the corpses for almost 4 days. The murderer treated the farm as his own sanctuary. During the investigation, officers found little Shazilia's broken mirror, its fragments scattered across her bedroom floor. Some believed she had seen the killer before the attack, perhaps through the window, perhaps inside the house. Her diary hinted at terrifying experiences. I hear someone in the attic. The mirror pieces suggested she may have thrown it in fear or tried to use it to see behind her. The final detail, her hair was clenched tightly in her hands, as if she had been pulling it out in terror before death. Whatever she saw that night, it broke her. Strangely, the animals became key witnesses to the atmosphere of terror on the farm. The dog, once friendly, now growled at specific corners of the barn spots where no one stood. The cows refused to enter their stalls for days, as though sensing the killer's lingering presence. Even the chickens, usually noisy, remained eerily silent. Animals can sense things humans cannot, and everything about their behavior suggested the killer stayed close, too close. To investigators, it wasn't just eerie, it was a warning. One neighbor reported something incredibly strange the night before the bodies were found. He saw a faint lantern-like glow moving between the farmhouse and the barn. Not fast, not frantic, slow, methodical, like someone calmly checking both buildings. But no family member was seen, and no one returned his calls when he shouted toward the house. That light now seems like the killer's final walk between the scenes of his crimes. A quiet patrol, ensuring nothing had been overlooked. Several windows in the farmhouse had faint scratches, as though someone had tried to look inside without being noticed. The marks were deliberate, forming long arcs as if fingers were tracing slowly along the glass. Some scratches pressed deeper, suggesting tension or an attempt to gain entry quietly. Investigators didn't know if the scratches came from before or after the murders, but their meaning was clear. Someone was watching this family closely, night after night. Someone who enjoyed watching them exist, until he decided to end them. Investigators canvassed the thick woods surrounding the Hinterkaifeck farm, dense trees that formed a natural wall. Locals admitted they felt watched every time they walked past the property, even before the murders. One farmer claimed he once spotted a figure standing perfectly still between the trees, observing the farmhouse at dusk. He waved, thinking it was Andreas Gruber, but the figure didn't move, not even a nod. When he approached, the figure stepped backward deeper into the woods and simply vanished. Police later realized this area was the perfect place for the killer to spy without being seen. The Grubers had complained that their lights flickered constantly, especially late at night. Neighbors said they'd see the electric lamps dim, brighten, then go black for long stretches. At first, it was blamed on faulty wiring, but investigators later proposed something more sinister. Someone inside the house may have intentionally cut the lights during certain hours to move around unseen. Imagine lying in bed, hearing footsteps above you, while the lights suddenly die. It wasn't electrical failure, it was control, the killer's way of keeping the family blind. The barn showed signs of struggle, violent, chaotic, yet strangely silent. Along one wooden beam, police found deep scratch marks, long and uneven, as if someone had tried desperately to hold on. One set of scratches matched the height where Shazilia's hair was ripped out. She may have tried to escape. These grooves were splintered with fresh wood, meaning they were made during the murder itself. It was a silent fight, muffled by hay and thick barn walls. The scratches remain one of the most haunting physical reminders of the family's final moments. Although the murders were committed with a pickaxe, the weapon itself was nowhere to be found initially. Police searched the barn, the attic, the house, even the surrounding fields, but the killer had hidden it with unsettling precision. It was as if he wanted the weapon to exist only as an invisible threat. Months later, during a renovation, the pickaxe was discovered buried beneath floorboards, in a place only someone familiar with the farm would know to check. This finding changed the tone of the investigation. The murderer didn't panic, didn't rush. He planned everything meticulously. He hid the weapon like a souvenir. In the weeks leading up to the murders, the family attempted to call a repairman to fix their malfunctioning telephone line. Multiple calls mysteriously never connected. Some believed the line had been cut intentionally, preventing them from reaching help. When technicians finally inspected it after the murders, they found deliberate tampering, not animal bites, not weather damage. Someone had severed the connection from outside the property. It was yet another step in isolating the family from the world. Multiple neighbors reported hearing strange sounds from the farm on the nights following the murder. Some heard doors shutting, others heard cattle being moved, and one swore they heard someone chopping wood. But no lamps were lit, and no voices were heard, just the farm functioning mechanically, like a puppet under control. It was as if the murderer wanted to keep up the illusion that the family was alive. The sounds weren't random. They were routine, mimicking the Grubers' daily tasks. The killer didn't hide. He lived their life for them. Inside the barn, traces of blood led toward the door, but the trail vanished just a few feet outside. No smudge, no footprint, nothing. It was as if the killer had stepped carefully over his own crime scene, choreographing each movement. Some investigators believed he carried hay or cloth to wipe away tracks as he moved. Others thought he might have used the snow to scatter the evidence deliberately. Either way, the precision was unnatural, like someone who had cleaned scenes before. Among the belongings in the attic, police found something chilling: a hand-drawn map of the Gruber home. It detailed every room, every door, and every blind spot. Some sections were marked with strange symbols, triangles near the bedrooms, circles around the barn. This wasn't a burglar's sketch. It was a blueprint made by someone obsessed with the family's routines. The map wasn't dated, meaning it could have been created long before the murders. It suggested the killer had watched the family for an uncomfortably long time. Some whispered that perhaps one family member survived longer than believed. The injuries on Shazilia suggested she stayed alive for hours after the attack, possibly hearing her family's last breaths. What haunts investigators is the possibility that she might have seen the killer return to check on her. The idea that she lay there, helpless, watching him calmly walk around the barn, is almost unbearable. If she did survive, she would have been the only one who knew his face, but she never had the chance to say a word. A few weeks after the murders, a strange letter was sent to a neighbor who lived near the farm. The message claimed the Grubers were targeted because they would not listen to warnings. It wasn't signed, and handwriting experts couldn't match it to anyone. Was it a taunt from the killer, a confession, or just a cruel prank? The letter referenced details about the farm that weren't public yet, details only the murderer or investigators would know. To this day, its origin remains unknown. On his final delivery to the Gruber farm before the bodies were discovered, the mailman noticed something strange. He saw a shadow move behind an upstairs curtain, slow and deliberate. But when he knocked on the door, no one answered, not even the animals stirred. He assumed the family was avoiding him, but the movement didn't match anyone he recognized. The figure was too tall to be Shazilia or the maid, too broad to be Victoria. Only later, after learning they were already dead, did he realize he might have seen the killer. Inside the Gruber home, investigators found a large wall clock that had stopped ticking at exactly 12:03 a.m. It wasn't broken. The mechanism had simply been halted. Some believed the killer damaged it during the struggle, but others suspected something more intentional. Clocks don't stop perfectly on their own. It looked as though someone deliberately froze time inside the house. Many interpreted it as the killer marking the hour he believed the family belonged to death. The eerie silence of the house matched that frozen moment. In the muddy path leading to the barn, police found wagon wheel tracks that didn't match any use by the Grubers. The wheels were thinner, more modern, suggesting someone had arrived with a small cart, but no neighbors reported seeing a wagon arrive or leave despite the wide-open farmland. Even stranger, the tracks stopped abruptly just a few meters from the barn, as though the wagon had been lifted or vanished. Investigators theorized the killer might have used the cart to transport belongings, or something far darker. The incomplete tracks became one of the most unsettling physical clues. When police searched the attic, they found blankets arranged in a deliberate pattern. Not folded, not messy laid out, as if someone had been sleeping there for days. The fabric was warm in one spot, suggesting the killer remained there even after the murders. Some blankets were flattened like a makeshift bed, others were arranged near the lookout hole facing the farmyard. This wasn't a quick hideout, it was a temporary home. The killer lived overhead like a parasite, watching the family's every move. One of the strangest findings came from the roof tiles. Investigators noticed footprints across the slanted roof, leading to the chimney and stopping there. No ladder, no equipment, no explanation. The marks were too spaced apart for a casual climb. It looked like the killer walked confidently across the ridge. Locals later admitted that sometimes, at night, they'd see a figure standing on the roof of the Gruber home, motionless. Whether it was a person or something else remains debated. After the murders, neighbors tried to help tend the animals, but the cows absolutely refused to enter the barn where the bodies were hidden under hay. They stopped at the threshold, mooing anxiously and backing away. Animals sense danger, they smell blood and fear in ways humans cannot. One farmer swore he saw a cow staring into the dim barn as if watching a figure inside, but when he looked, the barn was empty. Among Andreas Gruber's belongings, investigators found his pocket watch. It was stained, cracked, but still ticking. That tiny heartbeat of metal inside a house filled with silence felt disturbingly symbolic. The killer didn't take it, didn't break it. Almost like he wanted one thing left alive, something to keep time in a place where time itself had stopped. The watch became an eerie reminder of what death couldn't silence. For days after the murders, the livestock continued to receive fresh feed. Someone was taking care of them, measured portions, not random scattering. That meant the killer stayed on the property at least 3 full days, possibly longer. He kept everything running just enough to avoid suspicion. This level of calm cannot be overstated. He was comfortable enough to act like he owned the farm. Some villagers believed the farm was cursed long before the murders. One story claimed a woman in white wandered the fields at night motionless, drifting just above the grass. People said Andreas seemed terrified of her, though he laughed it off in public. After the murders, several locals swore they saw her walking near the farm again. To this day, some believe she was either a warning or the embodiment of tragedy yet to come. Whether hallucination or haunting, the sightings haven't stopped. A few days before her murder, the new maid told a neighbor something unsettling. She said the house felt wrong, as if someone breathed the same air but stayed hidden. She mentioned hearing creaking floors above her bedroom, though no one claimed to be upstairs. The neighbor later confessed she brushed it off, thinking the maid was simply nervous. But her fear wasn't imagined. She had walked directly into a house already claimed by the killer. Her intuition was the last warning anyone would ever receive. The lead detective, Andreas Reingruber, later confessed something he never dared to put in an official report. The Hinterkaifeck farm never felt empty. He told colleagues that while conducting the search, he repeatedly felt someone watching him from the shadows, as if the killer hadn't fled but was still studying the investigators. When he approached the hayloft, the hair on his arm stood up. A sudden, cold sensation washed over him. He turned multiple times, convinced someone was behind him, but every time he looked, there was only silence, dust, and darkness. It was like the walls were breathing, he whispered months later. During a secondary search, police discovered the mattock, the very weapon used to kill the family, hidden in a hollow section of the barn. But here was the unsettling detail. It was placed in a way that suggested care, not haste. No blood dripped onto the floor beneath it, no fingerprints. Whoever hid it had taken their time. That meant one thing after the murders. The killer stayed long enough to clean the weapon, dry it, and position it. It wasn't a hurried escape. It was ritual, maybe even pride. One investigator reported that the farm animals behaved strangely. The cows refused to enter their usual stalls. The dog growled at the barn's rear corner, always the same spot, hackles raised. But perhaps strangest was the goat, which refused to eat and repeatedly stared toward the attic ladder. Farmers knew their animals. They read them like children read picture books. And every creature on that property sensed it. Something was wrong in the upper shadows. A new investigator proposed a chilling theory after studying the footprints again. The prints approaching the house were deep, deliberate, and crisp. But the area was muddy, making it impossible for prints to be so perfectly preserved. He suggested someone may have created them intentionally, perhaps even stamping them. But why create fake footprints unless you wanted police to follow a false trail? Or worse, unless you wanted them to believe someone had entered from outside, when the killer was actually already inside. Several townspeople later admitted something they kept quiet. The night after the murders, someone had been spotted standing motionless on a hill overlooking the farm. Just a silhouette in the moonlight, still, silent, watching. When approached, the figure turned and walked into the woods with abnormal calmness, as if not afraid, not guilty, just finished. Some villagers wondered if the killer came back to admire the chaos he created, or if he had never left at all. A young constable claimed that during evidence collection, he heard something scratches, faint but rhythmic, coming from above. He thought it was a rat until he realized the attic was nearly empty and swept clean. When he climbed the ladder, the scratching stopped instantly. No animals, no objects, just stale air and a strange, metallic smell. He climbed down quickly, refusing to go back up. He said the sound wasn't like scratching on the attic, but scratching inside, something within it. A year after the murders, a woman cleaning out her late husband's belongings found a journal. Her husband, an early suspect, had written something haunting on the day after the killings. I hear the footsteps still. They follow me at night, just like they followed them. Investigators dismissed it as drunken rambling. But the date and the reference to footsteps was too coincidental to ignore. Did he know something? Or did he hear what the Gruber family heard long before death arrived? Some investigators proposed a theory so disturbing it was nearly laughed out at the station. The killer might have slept in the house between murders. Maybe he killed Andreas and Cecilia first, then took breaks between each killing. Maybe he laid down, rested, even listened to the family groan in their final moments before finishing them one by one. But the autopsy revealed something chilling. One victim had lived for hours, possibly conscious, possibly listening, possibly hearing footsteps walking away and then returning. The half-eaten meal left on the kitchen table told a quiet but horrifying story. The killer didn't rush. He sat down, ate, took small, careful bites. Investigators noted how the utensils were positioned neatly, not in panic. The killer even wiped his mouth with a cloth napkin. This was someone who felt at home, comfortable, unhurried, almost domesticated, as if he wasn't intruding, as if he belonged there, or as if he had been there many times before. One neighbor remembered something that still shook them decades later, a single scream echoing during the night of the murders. Not terrified, not panicked, but sharp, short, almost like someone being startled. They assumed it was a fox, a wildcat, anything except human. But looking back, they realized it was likely one of the victims awakening in the barn, seeing something in the dark. Something standing above them, something swinging. And that scream was cut off mid-breath. When investigators entered the master bedroom, they found the old wall clock still ticking audibly in the silence, a mundane detail, until they realized something. The clock had stopped exactly at 12:45 a.m. on the night of the murders. It hadn't run out of fuel. It didn't malfunction. The pendulum was forcefully halted. Forensic examiners later determined someone had grabbed the pendulum mid-swing. They didn't smash it, didn't break it, just stopped it. As if marking the beginning of something. A ritual, perhaps. A moment to remember. Inside Victoria's room, a mirror was discovered with a faint, foggy smear on its surface shaped like an exhaled breath. Yet the murders had happened days before, and the house was cold. No investigator could explain how condensation existed on a mirror in a drafty Bavarian farmhouse with open windows. Some believed it was the killer returning to look at himself. Others claimed they saw the outline of a handprint beside it. But the most haunting theory? The breath didn't belong to the killer, but the last victim trying to speak, trying to scream, trying to warn. In little Cecilia's hand, investigators found something heartbreaking. Strands of her own hair, clenched tightly between her fingers. Pathologists determined the girl likely pulled her hair out in terror while lying injured beside her murdered family, alive for hours. The barn floor showed signs she had dragged herself, tracing faint lines in the straw. But here's the part most people never hear. Near her tiny handprints in the straw were much larger ones, and those prints showed a person crouched beside her watching. Investigators reported the stove was still warm when they arrived, despite the murders occurring days earlier. Someone had recently lit a fire, baked bread, even heated broth, meaning the killer didn't just stay on the property, he cooked meals. Ate comfortably, slept in the beds, lived alongside the corpses as if they were even there. Some officers claimed they found fresh crumbs. Others believed someone was still inside the house during the first hours of the investigation, slipping from room to room as they worked. Farmer Andreas kept a detailed ledger of daily tasks. The one page was missing the page, dated the night before the murders. Witnesses recalled seeing him pacing in town, agitated, muttering about strangers and signs. Investigators believe he may have written something critical on that missing page, something that frightened him enough to tear it out. That page has never been found. Some think the killer took it, others think Andreas destroyed it himself, terrified it would become prophecy. In 1925, a German soldier confessed to killing the family. He claimed he did it after being haunted by voices in the attic during wartime, voices that he said returned after he met Victoria. Yet every detail he gave was wrong. Investigators concluded that either he was lying or something had warped his memory, twisting reality into nightmare. Locals whisper that he might have been influenced by the same presence that tormented the Grubers. After his confession was disproven, he was committed and never spoke again. Inside the barn, investigators found a broom resting mid-sweep. As if someone had been cleaning up, suddenly stopped. Straw lay in a half-formed pile. The broom's handle rested against a ladder, positioned unnaturally. Tests on the broom showed 2 sets of fingerprints, Victoria's and an unknown individual's. It suggested she had been forced to sweep in the killer's presence, working quietly, obediently, terrified, until the moment everything went black. A chilling discovery emerged months later. A boy hiking near the forest found faint footprints leading away from the farm. But they didn't lead deeper into the woods. They simply stopped. No struggle, no turning back, no sign of disappearance, just an ending, as though the person walked into thin air. Investigators followed the trail but found nothing. Locals claimed it was the devil. Others said the killer boarded a train and vanished. But many believed the truth was simpler. The footprints ended because the killer knew exactly where to vanish. When the victims were buried, villagers noticed something disturbing. Fresh flowers appeared on the graves every week for nearly a year. No one ever saw who placed them, and the arrangement was always the same: 3 white blooms, 2 red ones, and a wilted stem placed in the center. A pattern that had no meaning to anyone, except perhaps the killer. Police set traps, watched the cemetery. But whoever tended those graves moved like a ghost, always arriving unseen, always vanishing without a trace. The Hinterkaifeck farmhouse was eventually demolished, but locals swear the land hasn't forgotten. Travelers claim to hear footsteps crunching through the weeds at night, slow, deliberate steps that circle the empty field. Some hear whispers, some hear dragging sounds, some hear a child crying softly. One hiker insisted he saw a figure standing where the barn once stood, staring directly at him, unmoving, watching. Investigators solved many theories, but none answered the most terrifying question. If the killer vanished, then who? Or what still walks the property at night? Before you go, there's another case that refuses to stay buried. A home where time hasn't merely stopped, it repeats. Where footsteps echo even when the house is empty. Where each room still remembers the screams no one survived to tell. If Hinterkaifeck shook you, what happened inside the Hinterkaifeck murder house will haunt you long after you stop watching. Imagine waking up in a house where every floorboard creaks under a weight you can't see, where the air feels colder in the exact room 8 people were slaughtered, where visitors swear they're watched by something standing behind them even though they're completely alone. This isn't a legend. This is the Hinterkaifeck murder house. And for over a century, whatever happened here hasn't stopped. Click on the video on your screen and enter a place where even investigators refuse to stay after dark. I'll meet you there.